Ebola checks finally start at Heathrow's Terminal 1 tomorrow. Questions will be asked and temperatures taken. Hospitals are on standby. More entry points will follow next week.
It is likely we will see a case of Ebola in the UK, and this could be a handful of cases over the next 3 months.
So tonight, health workers strike over a blocked 1% pay rise. A work to rule could follow.
Pistorius' lawyers call for compassion for the convicted killer. They say he is a broken man.
Digging for history, but finding a fortune. A man with a metal detector unearths a Viking jackpot.
This is ITV News at 6:30 with Alistair Stewart and Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Health Secretary finally set out the detail of Britain's defence against Ebola. Screening begins tomorrow at Heathrow's Terminal 1, where 85% of passengers from West Africa arrive. They will have their temperatures taken and be asked to fill out a questionnaire.
Next week, Gatwick and the Eurostar will follow. Jeremy Hunt confirmed today cases were expected. A handful, not in double figures, he said, over the next few months. Well, tonight, specialist hospital units are already on standby. Our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan, has the latest.
As of tomorrow, passengers arriving at Heathrow Terminal 1 who've come from the countries most affected by Ebola will be screened for the virus, even though there are no direct flights. The public health risk is low, but the government believes Ebola will come back to Britain.
The Chief Medical Officer, who takes advice from Public Health England and the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, has this morning confirmed that it is likely we will see a case of Ebola in the UK, and this could be a handful of cases over the next 3 months.
The Health Secretary said passengers will have their temperatures taken and will answer questions about their possible exposure to the virus. He said those considered high risk will then be contacted daily. But some virologists have doubts about the effectiveness of screening.
So what you're trying to do is detect the one case of Ebola that might come through in large numbers of passengers. That individual may or may not be unwell and may or may not be infectious.
The UK's Ebola control measures will include screening at Heathrow, Gatwick and Eurostar terminals, which should cover 89% of travellers with tickets booked to the UK from the region. There are 4 isolation units on standby with a total of 26 beds, and callers to the NHS's 111 line will also be screened for Ebola symptoms. In truth, the passenger screening programme may be more effective in distributing healthcare information and reassuring the public than in actually catching cases of Ebola. And the Department for Health acknowledges that West Africa is the real front line in the fight against the virus. 750 British military personnel are being deployed to the region, where the number of cases is now doubling every 3 to 4 weeks, and 4,033 lives have now been claimed by Ebola. Carl Dinnan, ITV News.
Dan Rivers is live at Heathrow Airport for us this evening. Dan, what sort of impact is all of that likely to have on people passing through our major airports?
Well, Heathrow here are saying there will be no discernible impact on travellers. They say that this will be conducted at the border itself. So basically, when passengers go up and present their passports, they will find out if you're on one of these flights that's come through either Brussels or Paris, the most likely transit points from West Africa. Now there are no direct flights. If you are, they'll ask, have you been to West Africa in the last 30 days? If you say yes to that question, then you may be asked some more questions as part of this questionnaire, taken to one side. And if they think that you are high risk, they will then perhaps take your temperature and send you for clinical assessment. But the message from Heathrow and from the other major entry points into this country is there will be no extra queues as a result.
Dan, thank you.
Hundreds of thousands of health workers formed picket lines up and down England today, angry at the government's refusal to give all NHS staff a pay rise. Midwives, nurses, paramedics and porters walked out for 4 hours. It's their first pay strike in a generation, as Damon Green reports.
Ella doesn't want to go on strike. With a baby son to support, she can't really afford to lose half a day's money. In fact, she was only Jake's age when NHS staff last went on strike over pay, but today she took him to nursery and headed for the picket line.
Over the last 4 years, my husband works in the NHS as well, our household income's down by about £7,000. So everything's a struggle. Bills are a struggle, rising food costs are a struggle, rising fuel bills are a struggle. It's just really hard.
A 4-hour strike at the Salford Royal Hospital where Ella works, nurses and porters. But across the country in the cold and the rain, paramedics and midwives joined in the demand for a 1% pay rise for all NHS staff. Ministers say they can't afford that much, and a 1% rise for everybody would mean the loss of 14,000 nurses' jobs over the next 2 years. But health unions say the government's not being fair.
It really just shows some respect for NHS staff who work hours and hours of unpaid overtime that's worth double the pay increase that this independent pay review body is recommending.
Outside the Salford Royal, it wasn't just passing motorists showing their support. Even patients came out of the wards to stand with the strikers.
To be quite honest, I don't blame them for coming out on strike because they work so damned hard. The nurses, the porters, everybody.
We've spoke about all the sacrifices we've all made with our bills, with our food, with our insurances for our homes. We can't go any tighter. There's nothing left for us to give, and yet we're being denied a 1% increase. 1%!
Ella and her fellow health workers have now made their protest. They'll have to see if the threat of further action does anything to change ministers' minds. Damon Green, ITV News, in Salford.
Oscar Pistorius was back in court today as his defence team fight to keep him out of prison. The athlete was cleared of murdering his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp, but could be jailed for her manslaughter.
The sentencing hearing began with his psychologist describing him as a broken man. Our Africa correspondent Rohit Kachru reports from Pretoria.
He was guided through the crowd by the police for what might be one of his last appearances in this courthouse. Inside it, his punishment will be decided. Today, the judge heard from witnesses for the defence, called because their evidence might encourage leniency. Pistorius' psychologist was first, giving evidence off camera. She described his remorse.
We are left with a broken man who has lost everything. He has lost his love relationship with Ms. Steenkamp. He's lost his moral and professional reputation. On an emotional level, his self-perception, his self-worth and identity have been damaged.
But prosecutors said that his suffering didn't compare to the family of his victim.
We're now dealing with a broken man, but he's still alive. He can still pursue his career and walk outside.
Last month, Oscar Pistorius was cleared of murder, but convicted of the manslaughter of his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp.
A report in terms of section 276(1)(a).
A probation officer was asked whether he should go to jail, but recommended community service instead.
In order to satisfy the community's expectations with regard to retribution and compensation for the crime, it is recommended that the accused should perform free community service for 16 hours in a month.
His punishment might be to sweep the streets of Pretoria, but a severe custodial sentence is still a possibility. There'll be much more evidence before the judge makes her decision. Pistorius' character will be one consideration. The state of South Africa's overcrowded prisons will be another. The sentence will be delivered in the coming days. Rohit Kachru, ITV News, Pretoria.
The parents of Peter Kassig, the American aid worker being held hostage by Islamic State, today published a letter that he wrote to them from captivity. He describes his experience as mentally the hardest thing a man can go through, but said he knows his parents love him, and I quote, more than the moon and stars. Ed and Paula Kassig also revealed the terrorists sent an audio recording of their son 2 weeks ago.
Automatic, kind of toneless, as though he was a robot. And I'm sure it's because they were insisting what he could say.
Here, the Labour leader Ed Miliband is facing questions from his party tonight for the first time since last week's by-election scare at Haywood and Middleton. Labour won, but only just. Mr Miliband's addressing MPs at their weekly parliamentary meeting. His party is also split over a Commons vote tonight on whether or not to recognise Palestine. And our deputy political editor, Chris Shipp, is at Westminster now. Chris, to what extent, if at all, is this undermining Mr Miliband's authority with the party?
Well, Mary, the timing isn't great, let's put it that way. The Labour backbench motion on recognising Palestinian statehood is going on right now, is exposing splits in the party and in the shadow cabinet at a time when they could do with showing unity. Although we should point out that Mr Miliband isn't the only party leader with members who disagree on this particular subject, and the vote later will be largely symbolic in any case. The other challenge Mr Miliband's got is happening right now. I've just come from a very packed Gladstone room where he's addressing his peers and MPs for the first time since the conference speech where he forgot large chunks of it, since some polls have put the Tories in the lead for the first time in 2.5 years, and since that close shave in the Haywood and Middleton by-election last week. Now, Labour's new MP, Liz McGuinness, was introduced in the Commons this afternoon, but as she was, some of her new colleagues, some other MPs, were questioning whether Labour's in the right place on immigration. And one veteran Labour MP said to me that on the EU referendum and on immigration, Mr Miliband is simply in the wrong place.
We should offer a referendum. It's balmy not to offer a referendum. And I think they are fed up on immigration, and we should do something about that.
And is he going to be Prime Minister next May?
Yeah.
And that's hardly a ringing endorsement, I think you might agree, from Austin Mitchell. However, Mr Miliband's aides say he will be addressing this issue of immigration in the next week or so.
Chris Shipp at Westminster, thank you.
And alongside Liz McInnes, Douglas Carswell, the Tory defector, took his seat in the House of Commons today, the first elected UKIP MP. He was shepherded in by two former colleagues to silence from the Conservative benches. He switched to UKIP in August and won a resounding victory in the Clacton by-election last week.
A mother who killed her 3 disabled children tried to kill herself because she could not face the horror of what she had done.
A court today saw notes left by Tanya Clarence just after she'd suffocated 4-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old twins Ben and Max. She's now admitted manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Richard Pallow reports.
It remains hard to comprehend how this father has coped since the death of these his twin sons and his 4-year-old daughter, and indeed how Gary Clarence will now feel after today's decision. His wife Tanya will not face murder charges for what happened at their South London home almost 6 months ago. The 3 young children, all with the wasting disease spinal muscular atrophy, were suffocated in their beds. She then left 3 notes inside the property before her attempted suicide. One of them, to her husband, hauntingly read, "Gary, I don't want to be saved, please. I can't live with the horror of what I have done. I thought the pills would work. They didn't." Mr Clarence, seen here at a previous hearing, listened on as the Crown accepted his wife had endured a major depressive episode. For the prosecution, Zoe Johnson QC said, "It is clear on the evidence Mrs Clarence killed her 3 children because she wanted to end their suffering, and at the time she committed the act, she could not see any alternative or any other way out of their joint suffering." Tanya Clarence was not present today, nor did she appear via video link. But the court heard how previously she had bitterly regretted that she'd survived and now bitterly regrets the death of those 3 children. She'll be sentenced next month with an hospital order, most likely. Richard Pallow, ITV News at the Old Bailey.
Still to come in the programme, Nigel Farage gets an invite to the elections TV debate, but will the others agree to take part?
And hidden underground, we meet the man who unearthed these lost Viking treasures. These stories and more after the break. Hello, good
And welcome back. Now, if all the party leaders agree, UKIP's Nigel Farage will take part in a live TV debate alongside David Cameron, Ed Miliband and Nick Clegg. It would happen in the run-up to next year's general election, one of a series of debates proposed by broadcasters today. But as our political correspondent Libby Vina explains, getting all the parties on board might prove tricky.
I agree with Nick. An arbitrary national cap will not work. I agree with Nick. There's got to be a right of recall. I agree with Nick. We want consensus on this.
It was Nick's moment, all right, and Dave didn't like it much. Many judging he was overshadowed in 2010 by the man who became his junior partner in government. That may explain why today, visiting a school in Hampshire, Dave didn't rush to say yes. That invitation to Nigel, also something of a sticking point.
I'll have a look at this proposal. I think there are some questions over it, why all the debates inside the election campaign rather than spreading them out over a longer period, and also why include some parties and not other parties. So I think there's some problems.
Talking about Nigel Farage there, you don't think he should be included?
No, I was thinking about if you have one person, then the Greens, they've got an MP as well. So you need to think these things through.
The broadcasters want 3 debates, one between David Cameron and Ed Miliband, broadcast on Sky News and Channel 4 and chaired by Jeremy Paxman. One between the 2 main party leaders and Nick Clegg. This would be on the BBC, chaired by David Dimbleby. And a debate between those 3 plus UKIP leader Nigel Farage, produced and broadcast by ITV and chaired by Julie Etchingham. With the party's first MP starting at Westminster today, even that wasn't enough.
If we win the Rochester by-election, I will then say, well, thank you very much for including us in one of them, but really, we should be in 2 of them.
With 2 MPs, 2 debates?
Well, you know, there is more to life in politics now than just the House of Commons. We have the European Parliament, in which we came top.
Labour simply want to get on with it.
I hope David Cameron is not going to put up false obstacles to these TV debates happening. And frankly, he should be saying that these debates will happen. They must happen during the campaign. For my part, I'm going to make sure they do.
The Greens are now threatening a legal challenge. But whatever the arguments about the format, those first TV debates are unlikely to be the last. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
An inquest into the death of a British doctor captured by militants in Syria has heard how his family made superhuman efforts to secure his release. Dr. Abbas Khan's mother, Fatima, collapsed in court and she gave evidence. Her son was found in his cell just days before his planned release last December. The court heard he may have been forced to kill himself by his captors.
Serious concerns were raised today about the standard of care given to dementia patients in England. A scathing report from the Care Quality Commission said 9 out of 10 hospitals and care homes are failing on some aspects of their service. Rupert Evelyn reports from Bristol.
With her husband rushed into hospital, it was Joyce Mallard's daughter's responsibility to pull the emergency cord for her support. The response was woeful.
It was just like a big void that we fell into. With very little help.
The former nurse imagined that simple systems would exist to help dementia sufferers like her mother. Instead, she found a disjointed, dysfunctional process that failed to focus on the needs of the patient.
I felt completely abandoned. I was distraught because I didn't know which way to turn. I didn't know who to contact. I tried the GP, I tried the social services. And it was all, well, we'll go through the process and you'll be means tested, but that was like, we'll send you the forms. And I've got, you know, an 84-year-old distraught that I can't do anything with.
It's a familiar story, confirmed by the Care Quality Commission. It inspected 129 care homes and 20 hospitals across England. It found 90% of facilities had some variable or poor care, and assessments did not identify patients' needs in 29% of care homes and 56% of hospitals.
People with dementia are being let down by a system which isn't equipped to help them, and this must change. Small changes in the way in which services are delivered, care is provided in the care home or in the hospital can make a huge difference to their quality of life.
Dementia care is complex, expensive, and quality varies wildly, sometimes within the same organisation. And as our population ages, so demand increases. The evidence suggests many of those in need find their needs are not met. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Bristol.
And finally, a man on a treasure hunt with a metal detector has unearthed what experts believe to be one of the most valuable Viking hoards ever found in Britain.
It is thought to be worth hundreds of thousands of pounds and includes dozens of gold and silver pieces. Our Scotland correspondent Debbie Edward reports on the remarkable find.
Unearthed in a Scottish field after over 1,000 years, this Viking treasure would never have been discovered were it not for the persistence and patience of metal detecting enthusiast Derek McLennan.
You get beeps and bops from the signals, and in this case it was actually a bop.
The 47-year-old had been searching a field in Dumfries in Galloway for over 9 months when he made the largest discovery of Viking treasure in Scottish history.
This signal came through loud and clear, very, very strong. Decided to dig it. The spade went in, almost 18 inches, put my hand in the hole and grasped an object which I now know to be a Viking arm ring.
Derek and a team of archaeologists went on to unearth more than 100 objects dating back to the 9th century. As well as the precious silver armlets, they found this Christian cross with unique enamel decoration and a priceless Carolingian vessel, which is being painstakingly excavated. Dumfries and Galloway, where the hoard was discovered, would have had many Viking settlements during the 9th and 10th century, and it's thought these pieces, which would have been acquired as a show of wealth, might have been buried as a medieval version of a safe deposit box. Derek had considered calling in sick on the day he made the discovery.
I don't think it really has sunk in yet, you know, we're still in shock.
Do you think is this your greatest find? Do you think this will be your greatest find?
It's my greatest find until the next one.
It's a hobby that for once has really paid off. Debbie Edward, ITV News, Edinburgh.
On tonight's ITV News at 10, was King Harold really killed by an arrow in the Battle of Hastings? The new theory that could be one in the eye for what we learned at school.
10:66 and all that at 10 with me and Julie Etchingham. But for now, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.